Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my February TBR. Typically, for the month of February, I like to lean into the romance of it all, the love. But this year, February is one of the biggest release months for me personally. There are so many books coming out this month that I want to read that my TBR is so exciting to me, but also so difficult. So let's hope all I do in my free time is reading because I want to read all of these books so badly. But before we go into the books themselves, first a word from this video's sponsor, which is NordVPN. I'm so excited to be partnering up with NordVPN for this video because I've personally been using this product for years. Before we dive into more details, I do want to quickly shout the very special offer I have available to you guys today with NordVPN. If you click the link below or go to nordvpn.com/perusproject, you're able to get 4 months extra on a 2-year plan. Not to mention it's also risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, which is amazing. If you're not familiar, NordVPN is the fastest VPN on the planet, and VPNs in general have so many different super useful use cases. I would say one of my personal favorite reasons why I love using a VPN is entertainment access. I'm a big traveler. Clay and I like to visit lots of different places, see the sights, but at the end of the day, when we return back to our hotel room, we want to be able to access our entertainment that we were currently in the midst of at home. And by using a VPN, you're basically able, with the click of a button, to change your IP address location, meaning you're able to access your entertainment wherever you are in the world, which is just amazing because those Netflix series are not going to watch themselves no matter where I am. But this also has benefits on the flip side. As a cozy reader and watcher personally, I want to be able to have access to all the entertainment I want no matter where it's coming from. If you want to watch Survivor Australia, you got to be in Australia. And again, with the click of a button, I can access so many of my favorite shows that are abroad at home here in the States that I wouldn't otherwise have access to. But outside of all the amazing entertainment-based benefits of using a VPN, there's also a lot of security benefits as well. Using a VPN in general sort of insulates you online because trackers aren't able to access your IP, or they can't exactly place you. It makes it much more difficult to target you with like phishing, malware, and URL-based scams. Not to mention, NordVPN also has additional features like threat protection, which alerts you for things like malware, trackers, and just like invasive advertising. It also scans files that you're downloading offline and lets you know if there's anything hidden or dangerous within the file itself. And it even warns you about suspicious links or sketchy looking websites online too. Again, if you guys want to access my special offer, you can go to nordvpn.com/perusproject or click the link down in my description to get an extra 4 months on a 2-year plan. Again, a big shout out to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, but without further ado, let's go ahead and dive back into my February TBR. The first book that's on my February TBR is actually my IRL book club pick for this month, so I definitely need to get to it, and I definitely need to get to it soon, but luckily for me, I'm also really looking forward to reading it, and that is ChainGang All Stars by Nana Adeje Brenya. This book has gotten a lot of hype, a lot of buzz. A lot of people have really enjoyed this book, though it's also described as incredibly intense and violent, which I do want to call out. But this is basically like near future dystopian setting following our two main characters who are both a part of the prison system, and the prison system has evolved in such a way that people can literally fight for their freedom in a tournament gladiator-esque battle for the entertainment of not only the other inmates, but like other people tuning in to watch. It sounds incredibly dark and really poignant and topical, as obviously the influence is the prison system in America, which we all know is an incredibly flawed thing. Again, I've heard excellent things about this, though I am nervous about the intensity of it, but I'm also just looking forward to picking it up in general. I will be reading this month, and I will let you know my thoughts and feelings. Moving on now to the 4 February releases I hope to get to this month. There are so many amazing books coming out this month, and these 4 books are not the only books I plan to pick up and hope to read soon, but these are definitely some of the priority books on my TBR, especially the first 3. The first book I want to mention is The Trials of Empire by Richard Swan. This is the 3rd and final book to the Empire of Wolf series. I've already heard really amazing things about this concluding 3rd novel to this trilogy by some of my favorite reviewers. I am pumped for this. The Empire of Wolf series is by far one of my favorite currently releasing fantasy series out there. The characters, the complexity of the plots, the politics, everything about it has drawn me in so much. Book 1 was amazing. Book 2 is even better. I truly cannot wait to see how this entire thing is going to wrap up. But this series is set in a fantasy landscape ruled by an emperor, and how the emperor is able to kind of keep control of his kingdom is that he has individuals called justices which roam the land and kind of ensure that his laws are followed. Justices can also act as the judge and executioner of various crimes. In this, we are introduced to one of our main characters, Sir Conrad von Volt, who is a very powerful justice, but this story is not told from his point of view, but instead his apprentice, who is writing the story retroactively or reflectively from the future, documenting various events and investigations that sort of kicked off and then ultimately put them in the middle of this huge political conspiracy. I am in love with the characters, the action, the politics, the bureaucracy of this world. I am hooked. I have been anticipating this third and final book for months. I will be reading this right when it comes out, which is the early parts of February. I cannot wait for this. The next book that's on my TBR comes out the same day. It is probably also one of my most anticipated releases of the year. Deciding between which of these two books I'm going to read first, the last one and this one, is going to be a very difficult decision. But the other book I'm talking about is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, which is the first book to a new series by this author. I love Robert Jackson Bennett. I believe I've read every single thing he has put out as a fantasy author. Similarly, his characters and plots and writing style, I love everything about it. Every series I've read of his is also so unique and different from one another. It's just fantastic. This new series seems to have a bit of like a detective, thriller, investigative element to it, but it's also set in like a fantasy sci-fi-esque setting. But this book opens with a high imperial officer having been found dead at like the far ends of this empire, and his death is really suspicious because an entire tree has erupted from his body in what seems like a spontaneous creation. And in this world, there's lots of different like magical contagions, but even with this particular event is like very concerning to the empire. So because of this, the empire sends their best investigator, Anna, who's also our main character, to look into this crime or murder. Alongside her, she also brings like her new apprentice named Din, and they begin to work this case together. Anna is like a very talented detective, but she's also a little unorthodox, which to Din is something he's sort of struggling with. Din himself is also very talented. He has like a photographic memory, and initially he's a little unsure about Anna, but then they begin to form a bit of a camaraderie, and the case really begins to balloon. So many different inputs about this book just makes me feel like I'm going to love it, from the plot inputs to the characters to just the author himself. I could not be more excited about this. I will also be reading this month, definitely, hopefully, and I cannot wait. The next book that's also coming out in February that I desperately want to read is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. Catherine Arden, another one of my all-time favorite authors, also coming out with a book this month. I do not know how or why all of my favorite authors decided to release books within like a week of each other in the same month, but listen, I'm not going to complain when I am clearly going to be very busy with some fantastic reads, but this is another historical fantasy story, which I would say Catherine Arden is pretty known for. Her Bear and the Nightingale series is one of my all-time favorite fantasy series I've ever read, and this series is set during World War I, and we follow our main character who was a nurse in the war, but after an injury, she went back home to Canada. But after she receives a letter letting her know that her brother passed away on the war front, she thinks something a bit more suspicious is going on, so she travels back to the war, and after investigating and interviewing various soldiers, she realizes that something very strange is happening, and I think it has to do with ghosts, so she travels back to the war front once again to try to like solve what's happening and what's going on. Catherine Arden is known for her stunning writing and her perfect mixture of like historical inputs and influence with fantasy. I cannot wait for this book. I feel like it's going to be stunning on all fronts, and also this will be read this month because again, this month all of the releases are happening, it appears, at once. The next book that's on my TBR, I'm gonna say tentatively, is Crescent City #3 by SJM. I have read every other book that has come out in this trilogy that at this point I feel like I just need to know how the whole thing is going to culminate and come together. I struggled with Crescent City 2 despite liking Crescent City Run, and I recently read A Court of Silver Flames, which I documented and vlogged and did not enjoy at all, so I'm really not sure how I'm gonna feel about this book when it comes out, but I also know that there's gonna be FOMO and everyone's gonna be talking about it. I feel like I just need to like see for myself, so I'm having this book on my TBR. We shall see if I get to it this month, again, just because there's so many books I want to read, but I do want to just mention this because it is possibly going to happen, but TBD. The next book on my TBR is an ad I wasn't necessarily anticipating for my Q1 reads, but I read the first 2 books of this series again. Well, the first one again, the second one for the first time in January, and I love them so much I need to get to this 3rd book. And the book I'm talking about is Nona The Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I read Getting the Ninth again for the 3rd time in the month of January, and I finally read Harrow the Ninth for the first time this past month, which I adored. I loved the rereading experience of both Gideon and reading for the first time Harrow, but it also made me realize if I'm going to continue to have any success with continuing the series, I need to read the books right away. These books are written in a very detailed, sort of confusing, winding fashion, and I am someone who forgets details and can find myself confused a bit easily. So with that in mind, I don't want to let too much time pass before I get to the 3rd book within this series, because there's just a lot happening and I really feel like I have to pay attention. I love it, but there's also a reason why I reread Getting the Ninth 3 times. So there you go. But if you're not familiar with this series, it's kind of like a sci-fi fantasy tale following a variety of characters in space. Basically, in this space landscape, there are different houses on different planets, and they all have their different style and specialization of necromancy. And the first book, we're introduced to our main character, Gideon, who has been trying to escape her planet called Ninth House her entire life. And she finally makes a deal with her arch nemesis, Harrow, at the beginning of book 1 to basically travel with her to be her cavalier at this sort of political competition to become a liciter to the first house, who's like the most powerful house in this sort of space system. They begin to work with one another and get pulled into this like larger conspiracy that has to do with like everything and everyone that they're surrounded by. It's very strange and very intriguing. Book 1 very much gives like murder mystery vibes. Book 2, I don't even really know how to describe, but I really, really loved it. And I have no idea where we're going to go with book 3, but just like the reveals, the characters, the combat, the magic system, the sci-fi mixed with fantasy is just so good, so unique. I loved the first 2 books so much. I want to get to book 3. Speaking of a sequel, I definitely want to get to this month. I also have Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. I feel like I need to have at least one romantic book on my TBR for this month. I guess you could maybe count Crescent City 3 as well, but the jury's out if that book is actually going to be very romantic. But this, of course, is a sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which I read last year and really, really enjoyed. It's a very charming, cozy, sweet, less spicy fantasy romance book, which I personally really enjoyed. It was a very endearing tale and story. In this book, we're introduced to our main character, Emily Wilde, and she is like the foremost expert on fairies and fae, and she has been collecting stories and creating an encyclopedia as a part of her academic work, and she's almost complete. And she's just traveling to a new location to gather the last remaining stories that she needs to complete this. However, though, she's having a hard time connecting with the locals there, making collecting these stories a bit more difficult. Things further get turned upside down when her like arch nemesis work rival arrives, who is very charismatic and charming, who very much gives Hal from Howl's Moving Castle vibes, though they begin to work together and a fae mystery begins to balloon around them, and it's truly just delightful. Cute, charming. I loved the characters, I loved the dialogue, and it also has like a really well fleshed out like fantasy element as it relates to the fae. I just really liked book 1. I feel like I'm really gonna like book 2. I just want to be charmed, you know? The next book on my list is another priority 2024 read, and that is The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second standalone novel in between Joe Abercrombie's like 2 major series. My goal this year in general was just to read more Abercrombie and just be sure I'm knocking out the standalone novels and hopefully even starting that second trilogy. I read the first one last year and really enjoyed it, and so I'm hoping to get to the second one soon. They're gruesome, they're bloody, they're grimdark, full of characters that you feel like you should hate. And on paper, I would say you definitely do hate, but somehow you're very endeared to them in an unexpected fashion. This standalone novel sounds really interesting. It basically follows 3 different men and their journey leading up to one battle that they're all about to participate and fight in. And I believe we follow like their quest along the way. And all of these men come from different places, different political alliances. They're all, I'm assuming, going to be on different sides of this conflict. And I just know it's going to be a lot. And I am just so curious about this, and I just think the concept is so intriguing to me, so I'm also hoping to get to this month as well. Another book that's on my list is Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. I read Parable of the Sower a few years ago. It was one of my favorite books of the year at the time. It was haunting. I think about Parable of the Sower so often. And I am like scared to read this book, but I'm also so excited because I know it's going to be so excellent. This series is basically set in a near future America after a climate crisis led to like the societal collapse of everything. The inputs and influences of this new world created by Octavia E. Butler feels so possible. That's also why it makes it so horrifying but important to read. In this story, we're introduced to our main character Lauren at the beginning of book 1. She's living in this sort of isolated community with her family and a few other families. They all work together to try to survive. Lauren herself has a secret, and that is that she actually has hyper empathy, meaning she can be like dilapidated, the feelings and pain of other people surrounding her, and she also has to keep this secret. At the beginning of this book, Lauren has this feeling that something is on the tipping point, and that if their community is going to survive, they need to sort of make changes to better face the world in its new reality. Structurally, this book is also sort of written like Lauren's diary. She's contemplating, she's theorizing, and she's also like working through the creation of a new religion that's sort of better suited for this new world. Book 1 is about like the beginning of Lauren's quest. Book 2, I believe we are settling in a new location. I really am looking forward to reading this book. I have a feeling it could be one of my favorite books of the year. I also in general just want to read more Octavia E. Butler books this year. There's a few more on my TBR I have not gotten to yet, so yes, I want to read this. And the last book that's on my TBR is a sci-fi read, and that is Ancillary Sword by Ann Leckie. I am really in the mood for sci-fi. You wouldn't guess that based off of all the other books on my TBR, but I read a fantastic sci-fi book last month that just like really blew my mind, really captured me, that it really inspired me to like continue to read more sci-fi. I obviously read Ancillary Justice last year and loved it. It made one of my favorite books of the year. So I already knew I wanted to get to the sequel this year, but it definitely like skyrocketed to the top of my TBR this month after I finished that other book. But this is such a fascinating series. There's so many things that Ann Leckie does that just absolutely blew my mind. This book follows our main character Breck, and Breck was once known as the Justice of Torin, which is like an AI spaceship existence. Through living as this ship for like thousands of years, she also exists as like 20 ancillaries. All the perspective and consciousness of these ancillaries are connected. So our main character Breck used to live as both a spaceship and through the eyes, lives, and brains of 20 people at once. However, though, we find Breck at the beginning of book 1 alone, isolated, and a singular individual, and they're on some type of quest for revenge. We don't know why, and we don't know really where they are or who they're with or who they are now, but we slowly throughout the course of the first one unpack Breck's past and sort of what's motivating her in the present. It's so good. And outside of just having an absolute breakneck plot, there's so much interesting dialogue and discussion around gender, culture, and language, and just everything about Ancillary Justice I loved. And I just know I'm gonna love Ancillary Sword too. So I want to get to this book this month as well. Also, before I forget too much of the plot, which we all know I'm guilty of doing. Alrighty guys, that is my February TBR. A bit ambitious, but I have hope for myself. Again, big shout out to this video's sponsor, which is NordVPN. Again, I'll have my special offer linked down below if you are interested. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.